Hey everyone, so I want to do a little slowed down real-time blending demo for markers. So you can see I've got my grayscale, they've got their little swatches on them like I showed in the beginner video, and they also, this is just a piece of Bristol. I usually work on more waxed surfaces. We'll try it. This will show a few more streaks, stuff will dry a little quicker. It'll be fine. I have about 9 of these all totaled. So I'm gonna try not to use all of them. I don't know how big each of your packs is. I think I asked you for 6, right? I will try to limit myself. So I think that sometimes it can be a little confusing. We're like, layer that color over that color over that color. And if you don't have, at least in the grayscales, I know that you all have percentages essentially, like one color percentaged out into a marker, which is what these is. These are. Wow. Just wow. So you'll notice if you are actually doing it like the mathematical way, right, that when we swatch these, chisel tip has the bigger, that's how you know when you pick it up. So if that's 1, 2, like even if you line them up right next to each other, you do get a pretty good gradient, but you need however many markers I've got to get to a dark color. And some of them make the jump better than others. Like that 2 to 3, very nice. But then that 1 to 2, a little iffy. And that's looking pretty good. You could do this for everything and actually get back to black, back to white, back to whatever. It will take you forever. So that's one of the reasons that we like to do this a little bit more with blending techniques, things like that. Most of my videos, I speed them up so that you don't have to watch me work quite so long. Trying to save you some time there, but instead I'm going to pick a couple colors that aren't right next to each other so that you can see how effective that's going to be. I tend to really like that 1 is my lightest color, obviously. I like that 3. 1, 3. I'm going to jump from 3 to like 5 or 6. What's 6? How dark is it? Let's see. That's good in there. We'll see. I should be able to marry them. It should be fine. And let's go 1 darker, not all the way to black or anything. Let's go for like an 8. Where's my 8? Maybe it's you. That's not it. 8's missing. Guess we're skipping to 9. Yeah, that's a big jump. It'll be fine. So as we discussed in the other demo, that's just another marker that's put on. I'm sorry, it looks like blood. Generally speaking, I like to lay on my light first. So let's assume that this is a sphere and light is coming from this direction. So it would be like highlight, mid-tone, deep shadow. If we're doing real talk here, there'll be a bounce shadow, right? Or a bounce highlight. I've outlined these in colored pencil because graphite does sort of get mucked in there, so I hope I drew really light and that's not going to be a problem. So when I do my highlight, in order to get a very, very smooth blend, I'm going to fill everything in this circle. I'm going to say that this is my lightest color. I'm not going to go to white. You certainly can go to white and leave that as like a harder edge highlight, but it's harder to get a really nice blended edge to it. But we can do that too. So let's leave a little hard white highlight right in here so that you can see that it can be done. So these are chisel tip. I like brush tip better, but I know a lot of people still have chisel tips. So you can see even just starting out that like I said the highlight was inside this circle, but we're going way past that circle. Guess why? We talked about leaving a little bounced highlight down here, so we're gonna go ahead and carve that in too. Pretty good start. What did I say was next? 3. So that's this color. So that's a pretty big jump. I'm gonna go ahead and try to do, let's fill the whole area with this. Let's do it that way. So because I'm working on Bristol, things don't stay wet very long. Or yes, they absorb in. They're not gonna stay wet the same way that like a waxy surface thing is. So I've got to work a little quick. So if my midtones are somewhere in here, I'm going to try to carve it with some feathering, you can see that like that edge kind of moves. That means the paper is still wet. So gesture this in. So you can see how the paper is still wet, that's sort of blending on its own. We can use that. That's because of the alcohol from flooding it with our lightest color is actually helping us. So keep the momentum going. Let's go for 6 here. Which is pretty dark, but it'll be fine. So I'm being pretty messy with this, sort of to show you that like you can rework over it and figure it out as you go. I might not always be this messy, but it's a nice way to look at it. So that is our darkest color. And that bounced highlight's a little bright. Let's tone her down. Let's do the 3 over it. Okay, so we've started to get some shape here. I might carry this 3 also up and around into this corner. And then, you know, start to darken in here. Just to blend that a little bit. So what I'm gonna do now is go back to my lightest color, which seems kind of funny, but we're working consistently. Also, when I put my markers down over here, I'm trying to keep them in the same order every time I set them down, light to dark, so that I can pick them back up in the same order. It just makes things a little quicker. Still a little more in here. And this can come up. There we go. All right, so we have a hard white highlight. Sorry, you're gonna be able to see that line where I sketched in our boundaries, but that's okay. So when I go over with this lightest color, when I layer over that color, the exact same marker, it does get a percentage darker. So it sort of adds every time you go over it. So you could do a lot with just one marker by percentage adding it in layers. Sort of like the flood tool in Photoshop, opacity tool. So I'm using this in sort of a circular motion. It's gonna start, you can see that it's gonna start bleaching almost the layers underneath it. That's the alcohol in this marker affecting the layers underneath. So I always want to carry my lighter color over my darker as I go so that it can do that sort of softening, that bleaching. So now we're going to take our darker color, but we're not going to go, so this was 3 before, we're not going to start at the edge of 3, we're going to start back here and allow this to bleach and darken back here. So when you go over, you don't always use all of the colors over again. Sometimes we only use our lighter ones, sometimes we get a little darker. You can really finesse it. Also, the more we work with this, the more we flood the fibers of the paint and we get softer edges because it's holding more alcohol. So you can already see this is starting to soften up a lot, right? So even if I wanted to do a little closing this in, it's already softer and I can pop back over to the 1 and add another layer of this. So now there's 3 layers thick of this color, which is going to help it marry closer into that one. I don't know why in the French grays their lightest color is peach. Okay. So 6, which was my second to darkest. So you could see that was here before. It now looks like that color because of the bleaching. But we're just going to work with it and bring it back in. We want to use this full range of colors. We don't want it to get too light. So that's 6. I'm gonna go back to the, pick up the right one, to the 3 and use that to create a softer in between while that's still wet. So you can see it's also getting darker overall, right? So make sure that if we wanted to preserve that white in the center, that spot right there, we really got to work at remembering to do that because it's going to sort of close in on itself. So now this all looks very flat. It all kind of looks like the same color, which is where that darkest shadow is going to help us out. So this one is a pretty big jump up in color. It's pretty dark. I try to make sure that I use brush strokes that sort of mimic almost hashing or feathering, you'll hear me call it a lot, because it's easier to break up thinner lines when we're layering. So if I go back to 6 and just real easily do the same sort of motion with that, it's going to break it up pretty quick. Now that spot right there looks a touch choppy, so I touched it with 3. There we go. If I still wanted this to get darker, this highlight is a little bright, so this is my 3. We want it bounced, not like a light effect. So you can see that the more markers you get on the page, the quicker and easier to blend they become. So it's terrifying at first because it looks very choppy, but the more markers, the more time you spend really finessing it into where you want it to be. Certainly the more easily they begin to blend together. It's also because I'm working in one area for an extended period of time. So this whole circle is pretty flooded with alcohol right now. So they're sort of melting as they go. So we've got a little bit of futzing up here and stuff. You could go back through, you could use a blending marker. I have one somewhere, a Prismacolor one, yeah. So colorless blenders do bleach color a little bit. So if I was like, ooh, this got a little nuts, I also like to use them when you're blending from a color into pure white of the paper. Colorless blenders are your friend. They're just gonna soften that edge. I know you guys get all these squeaky sound effects. They do have a bit of a bleaching effect, so like if I were to go in here and just be like, I don't like that, that might show up sometimes. You can see like, shoop, that swipe, it just sort of bleaches it out. So you do want to be careful using a colorless blender on something you've worked hard to build up in, because it can create kind of white spots. See how that bleaches? So that's why I prefer almost always to just use the lightest color of your markers to do it, because it bleaches, but it also adds back in tone. But the colorless blenders are nice for if I hadn't preserved that very well, for example. It would be very easy for me to be like, I would like a highlight there, please. And then you can kind of sit back and watch it bleach it. Which is, like I said, the alcohol reacting to the pigment that's already down. So since they're bound by alcohol, they kind of, you can go back over them and you can fix the spots that are bleached, but it does do that. Keep it in mind. Fabulous. So that's the basics of doing that one. I know a circle is what I do all the time. It's kind of my go-to for demos. So I thought I would do a different color in case you're tired of looking at circles. And play a little bit with, like, if you create amorphous shapes, 3D shapes, things like that, how you might want to think about lighting them. So I'm gonna say like highlights on edges, essentially. Drawing these so you can see them, but I don't want them to distract from us later, like that did. So for that purpose, get this out the way. Where's my number 1? Here we go. So if I'm gonna say there's like various highlights all over the place and this is dark in the center, I still am going to begin by preserving a white because that's fun, and then flood everything as much as I can with my palest color. So we're doing sort of like a water droplet shading on this one. I'm going to go ahead and use my darkest color all around the edge. Except for maybe that edge. No. We're making up an object and a light source, like a little water droplet. And then I like using these fine tips to do some feathering, so I might feather a little bit around, you know, thickening one side, feather it up. So I'm trying to work kind of the opposite of this one, just in case that's how your brain prefers to work. So that was my darkest color, that was my 9. Here's a 6. But I'm also going to much more control where my shadows are. So we want like a really smooth, and mostly we want light in the middle. It doesn't work very well as an illusion if it doesn't have light in the middle. So knowing that, we're not gonna like go crazy bringing the shadows in until we get to our second to lightest. So here's my 3, that's this range here. And we are going to make sure we overlap what we just previously filled in. We want some of that bleaching, right? Some of that blending, some of that softening. You can see how quickly, like, just running this lighter color does start to soften the ones underneath it. Now we've got all this room to close in, so let's find our 1. So I want maybe a big highlight here and a smaller one there. So this is kind of the world where it gets frustrating to not have one of these number 2s, right? But knowing that we know that this will slowly bleach out under layers, could certainly switch. My little thing's coming off. So you can see that it is starting especially to bleach that number 3. So just keep carrying it around. I apply a lot of pressure when I'm doing this also. I don't think you actually have to. For some reason my hands always cramp when I do markers because my body seems to think they really need to be applied strongly. If you suffer from this, I'm sorry. So even with that sort of crazy made up light, you can see that you can create some pretty fluid shadings on whatever sort of surface you're looking for. If, once again, I wanted to now be able to pull out some really, really bleached areas, make sure that this is clean, clean, clean. You can use your colorless blender to purposefully bleach areas. If you know that it does that, use it to your advantage, right? So it's nice to have the small sharp point to do it, but You can certainly get more coverage, more alcohol coming out with a bigger tip, the chisel tip. Often when we bleach with that, it also brings out its undercolors. You can see it went more pink. But that's sort of a quick basics, slowed down real-time blending with a couple markers, how you can use that overlaying of the lighter colors to bleach the underlayers and really nicely marry them together. You can always also, I know that a lot of you only may have grayscales or whatever, you can use markers and colored pencils very well together, just so that you know. So if, as you're working on this project, it's a very warm study because of what it is. So let's pick a warm color to go with it. My French grays are definitely a little pink. Then you can always, you know, bring a little color into it and think of it as like tinting. So it does affect, because of the way colored pencil works, it does work fairly well at applying the color even on top of our darker areas. So it's going to show up best in lighter areas, and your darker areas are going to still be pretty dark, but they'll have a little bit of it. And you can use this to give yourself a little bit more interest when you're doing some of these marker things. So you can use them in combination for sure. These are also occasionally really nice if you are even working in color to clean up blends or add a little detail or punch a color. You are always able to layer colored pencil over marker very nicely, and it does. They're just best friends. That's why we teach them together in class. Sorry, sometimes it's hard for me to talk while drawing, apparently. But you can see that, like, it's very easy to then go through and add that. I could change the colors of things. So there's that. You can even use colorless blenders on top of marker. Once they're dry, they're dry. So I can now burnish this in with a colorless blender. And even though I did a fairly light layer of colored pencil, there's enough pigment there for me to get a pretty good wash of tone, right? So I know that a lot of you might get bored as we're working, but you can use your colored pencils and your markers kind of in tandem to create more interesting effects for yourself. And they can kind of help. So if you don't have a lot of markers to do a color, you can always know that you'll mask it later. All right, so you can see that created a nice thin wash of color over everything. In this corner, I didn't bother blending over there, but it does affect it, it does change it. So if you want to layer those for this 3D shapes assignment, that's perfectly fine. Hope that helps everyone. Hope that you have a good day and good luck.